We usually stay on, it was on 7th, so we stay on, there's no
That's
bike
funny.
paths, we stay on the sidewalks unless there's a jogger.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to call the work session for February 6th of Sierra City Council to order, please. We have a number of items today that we'll talk about. I will just mention that Rachel is still in Mississippi, and Ms. Ash let us know that she had another engagement coming up at the last minute dealing with her work, so she won't be here today either. The first item today is the council meeting agenda items for February 8th. And we'll just run through those as quickly as we can. Obviously, roll call, invocation pledge, approval of the agenda, no awards and presentations, the city manager's report. We have a couple of consent agenda items, which are the regular city the special and regular city council meetings for the 23rd and 25th of January. Any additions, edits to the council meeting minutes for those two dates? Okay. Then we move on to first item, public hearing item is item number 3, which is a code text amendment for sign regulations.
Jeff's gonna.
Oh, there's Jeff. Okay, Mr. Pregler, would you mind giving us the rundown, please, for staff report?
Of course. Thank you, Mayor Mueller and members of council. Staff is proposing a number of amendments to the sign code regulations. The impetus for many of the text changes is compliance with the Supreme Court decision Reed versus Town of Gilbert, which found that sign codes throughout the country needed to be content neutral and provide equal protection for all sign types. Therefore, staff is revising the definition of many of the signs by structure type rather than having specialized standards for specific events. For example, signs previously defined as garage sale signs or open house signs, which infer that the individual read the content, are now defined as banner signs, A-frame signs, et cetera, et cetera. Again, describing the type, structure of the sign, not the sign content. Secondly, the city is also aware of the challenges that local businesses have had in the current state of the economy, and therefore wanted to include sign standards that supported these businesses. So the focus of the remaining amendments recommends increases in advertising opportunities while providing safety and aesthetic elements. For example, whereas A-frame signs are currently prohibited, the proposed text amendments would allow A-frames with specific safety standards. So the first section that was amended was Article 151.02, definitions. The amendments in this section include a number of new definitions for signs that are compliant with Reed versus Town of Gilbert, meaning that the signs are content neutral. There are also new definitions in this section which reflect the increase in permitted sign types. And then the second section to be amended would be Article 151.10, sign regulations. The first amendment in this article removes the exempt sign section. Many of the signs referenced in this section are not content neutral and therefore in violation of Reed versus Town of Gilbert. The second amendment renames the temporary sign section to portable signs. Temporary signs infer that an event is temporary, which requires that the individual read the sign. Again, to be content neutral, this section is supposed to be renamed, again, to portable signs. Thirdly, the portable sign section was reorganized to make the standards more easily understandable and provides for additional allowances for signs, such as exempting signs that cannot be viewed from a public street, allowing A-frame signs, and extending the length of banner signs from 70 days to 90 days a year. The standards for political signs were removed, and a reference was made to the state law regulating political signs. The next amendment relates to the prohibited signs section. The exemption language relating to reader board signs has been removed because it currently allows special provisions for specific uses. Exemptions within specific sign categories such as this have been eliminated to comply with the findings in Reed. Another amendment relates to the height of permanent freestanding signs. Now, the current code allows a maximum height of freestanding signs within commercial zoning districts of 10 feet. Staff is proposing an amendment that would increase the maximum height of these signs to 15 feet when located adjacent to arterial roadways such as Fry Boulevard and the state highways. The maximum height will remain 10 feet along collectors and local streets. Now, in a related amendment, the placement of all freestanding signs will now be required to be set back 5 feet from any property line to eliminate conflicts with pedestrian vehicle traffic on the sidewalk and on the roadways. Next, the maximum total of wall signage for commercial buildings is currently calculated by determining the vertical length of the building frontage and multiplying by 1.5. Staff is proposing to increase the multiplier from 1.5 to 2, which will provide additional wall signage per business. Freestanding signs for multi-dwelling uses such as apartments are currently allowed to have a maximum sign area of 32 square feet if one-sided or 16 square feet if double-sided. Staff is recommending an amendment that would allow a maximum sign area of 32 square feet for a double-sided sign, which is consistent with the sign area for commercial freestanding signs. And some of the other smaller amendments in this section include increasing the height and size of permitted conditional uses in residential zoning districts, relocating and renaming home-based business signs and directional signs. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on this amendment on January 16th, 2018. There were no public comments at the meeting. The Commission did vote unanimously to approve the amendments with a vote of 5-0. Staff provided copies of the amendments to the Chamber of Commerce, local sign companies, and local realtors, and no public comments have been received to date. And this does conclude staff's report.
Thank you, Mr. Pregler. Questions for Mr. Pregler? Discussion? Yes, ma'am.
Jeff, Mr. Pregler.
Yes.
I'm still having difficulty with the 15 foot high signs. As I drove down Fry, I could see the signage for ways, and there's some really tall ones, and I don't know how tall they are. I don't want to call a business name right now, but I'll ask you about it. And I don't quite know how high 15 feet is when you look down the street. But the taller the signs are, the less attractive they are looking down Fry. And I'm just, I imagine the signage now, the height, unless it's grandfathered in, is 10 feet. And that seems to be nice and looks good from quite a few of the newer signs. But I think 15 is awfully high. And I don't know what other people's opinions are about that, but it just, I'm not sure that would keep with what I like to call the aesthetics of the city, at least where we're headed. So that would be a concern I have, and I guess that's what it is, a concern. I'm not going to go chop down 15-foot signs, but that just seems a little unreasonable for our community.
May
I agree with Glenn.
Well, yeah, and I'll ask the question in support of that. Why are we doing that?
Mayor Mueller, Council Member Mount, there have been a number of requests from business owners asking for additional height and signage. They feel that given
How many of them? How many business owners?
Just this week, we've had one person request, probably half a dozen in the past couple of years, I would imagine. I don't have a specific number, but there are requests quite often for additional heights and sign. And the reason for that is because, number one, they're factoring in the speed on the arterial roadways. You know, the faster somebody goes, it takes a little bit longer for you to read and focus in on a sign. The idea being that it's a little bit higher, you'll be able to easier read the sign. It's a little bit higher goes from 10 feet to 15 feet. And again, this is a request only for arterial roadways, not for the additional signs in the community.
I just want to point out one other factor that plays into this is the roadway grade. Some properties are set below grade, particularly like on 92. So the lower signs are definitely harder to read. In a case like that.
Well, in that case, can we not simply
Exception.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that become an exception? Like, in other words, instead of saying that
Or you
the
could
total,
measure from grade.
Correct, and that
you
would be
can.
my question, is just from the side of the road, because I agree with Gwen as well, and that was actually going to be one of my points.
There is actually an amendment in this section which has a change to how we measure signs, and the measurement's going to be we're going to measure from the adjacent street grade highest street grade. So in that particular case, if the sign sits 10 feet below the street, we wouldn't count the 10 feet until actually you're at the highest point of the street, and then you go 10 feet from that point.
So what I'm hearing the council say is we don't really want to go 15 from the grade level?
Yes.
Well, it's, with that explanation, but that looks like it could make some signs really, really high.
Well, no, I think though, I agree with what you're saying. I think though that the idea would be is if you put you set a cap, right? That the height, the sign can't exceed
15.
Not 15, because if for example, if I'm on a low grade part of the road,
Right.
and I put it at 15, then if I've got one that's next to me that's at a higher grade and it's at 15, you start to see where they stack up. What I'm suggesting is if you level it off and then don't worry about how far down they have to go, but you don't exceed a certain height
Above the roadway?
above the roadway, or in terms of just general elevation where everything's uniform, maybe that would help taper some of that off and get to the point that Chuck was saying. I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking, but I'm still trying to figure out if we're getting, how many businesses are actually coming in and asking for this.
Just to kind of give it a historic perspective, I know in past years, having lived here a while, even before I was on council, there was some beautification movements that went in, and that's how we kind of arrived at the current heights we have now, and it deals with the aesthetics that you just mentioned. So my question is, do we really need to go that extra 5 feet? And I think doing it from grade level makes some sense. Matt, you have one?
Yeah, 2 points. Firstly, the method for measuring sign height is either the highest point of the adjoining finished grade or the finished elevation of the sign. So you have 2 options, and you could go with whatever measurement gives you the additional, or the highest elevation for the sign. So that's already provided in the sign ordinance. And secondly, most businesses will say that they want taller signs. Most of them hire a contractor and then they comply with whatever the standards are that are in place. But I understand that it's a balancing act between community aesthetics and economic interests, so that's within.
But I don't understand I don't think that there's an economic interest if everybody's already playing off the same level playing field, which is 10 feet. So the only thing that we're doing is allowing new people to come in with a better competitive advantage than our current people that are already here. So I don't think that that's actually the issue. So the question comes up is if I'm sitting in my backyard and I don't have a 5 feet more of a sign blocking my views, do I want somebody to have a new business, because I don't know of an existing business that's probably going to tear their sign down just to put up a 5 foot higher one? Do I want that to potentially go away? So I think, Mayor, from that perspective, then I would side on the property owners who live in this city that probably don't want an extra 5 feet of somebody's sign pointing into their backyard. There is no competitive advantage if we keep the standard the same. There's only a competitive advantage if we change the standard and the people who can afford to make the changes can do so.
I agree with that. And I would also say, and forgive me, please don't follow me home now, but now I'm scared to say something I don't know. But it's, I believe Fry is 35 miles per hour. That's pretty slow to see the signs. I don't think that there needs to be an increase. I think.
5, really?
I was like, don't follow me.
So I guess what we're saying, Jeff, is that we need to look at those sections of code and come up to the fact that we only want a 10-foot sign. That's the current standard.
Mayor Muir, that is the current standard, and if it's the council's direction to remove that amendment to allow 15-foot signs, we can certainly remove that.
And we have time to ask them to do it, but without an amendment on Thursday?
Well, this is the 30-day public comment
30-day
period.
public
Yeah.
period? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
One more comment?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any consideration for the visibility of addresses on buildings? That seems to be something that's difficult for a lot of places to find where the addresses are on businesses.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Calhoun, that's actually a separate section of the sign code. There's a minimum, I think, 2-inch letters.
6 inch.
I'm sorry, 6-inch letters is the minimum. I'm sorry. I knew as soon as I said it, I was wrong. It was 6-inch letters.
Thought I was going blind. Okay, 6. Okay. I guess is that like a standard for communities? Some of them just seem. And do we have anything that says that an address must be visible from the street?
It has to be on the front of a building. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the sign itself, but on the front of a building.
Right.
Okay.
So the quick answer is there's no standardized method of where the building number or the address number is right now in the code. It just has to be 6 inches
On the front of a building.
on the front.
Yeah, I just wondered if, since this is about the buildings and the signage and everything, I just wondered if it had been considered.
It's a different section. But,
Okay.
Yeah.
And my last question, just as we start to talk to people about it, I want to make sure that I'm not confused. When we're referencing the Reed versus the City of Gilbert Supreme Court case, and then the changes that are being proposed, it's that we're out of compliance currently with the ruling with our current code.
That is correct.
And that essentially what it's saying is that we can't specifically target a type of sign, i.e. a garage sale, yard sale, but what we can say is if it's on a banner or an A-frame, these are the specifics, because that's the violating part, correct?
That is correct. That is correct. The idea is that the signs have to be content neutral. We cannot describe them as a type of event or a type of.
Because then it looks discriminatory against those types of.
That's exactly
Okay,
it.
Got it.
Yep.
Clear. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I just have one last quick question on this. I saw that we were basically getting rid of the prohibition on A-frames. I didn't see anything, and nor do I believe there ever has been anything about H-frames. Is that still, we're just sticking with the type of sign, and you can put it out as long as it is within these specifications?
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Wolf, I believe there was something that mentioned H-frames in the code, but as I've mentioned in the past, we don't mention every single sign in the sign code. There are minimum standards that they'd have to meet, such as not being placed in the right of way, not being in the clear vision area. But yeah, if it wasn't specifically mentioned, there aren't specific standards for it, but they'd have to meet those minimums.
Any further discussion? Okay, and again, this is out for 30-day public comment. We'll move on then to item number 4, Mr. Pregler. This has to do with amateur radio antennas, right? Okay.
That's right. Thank you, Mayor Mueller, members of council. The city has been receiving a number of inquiries about the installation of amateur radio antennas within residential zoning districts. However, the development code does not currently provide clear standards for these antennas. For this reason, staff is proposing amendments that both define amateur radio antennas and provide safety and aesthetic standards. In addition, staff is also recommending a review process be established that defines permitting requirements. Specifically, a building permit would only be required when antennas are installed with permanent mounting or support or have a base diameter more than 2.5 inches. Further, a conditional use permit will be required when the height of an antenna exceeds 70 feet or the base perimeter exceeds 12 inches. In addition to the amendments related to the amateur radio antennas, staff is also proposing clarifications to the commercial communication tower standards. With the approval of a separate ordinance defining standards for communication towers within the public right-of-way, the language needs to be amended in this section to remove references to communication towers in the right-of-way with citation to the applicable code section included. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on the amendments on January 16th, 2018. There were no public comments at the meeting. The commission voted to unanimously approve the amendments with a vote of 5-0. Subsequent to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, staff met with representatives from the local Amateur Radio Association who provided comment regarding the amendments. So based on this discussion, the amendments, specifically the permitting process, were revised to the current proposal you have before you today. Apart from the comments from the Amateur Radio Association, no additional public comments have been received. This concludes staff's report.
Questions for Mr. Pregler? Yes, sir.
How many people called up at these inquiries?
Mr. Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Mount, you're referring to inquiries for standards for radio antennas, or?
The city has received a number of inquiries about the installation of amateur radio antennas. How many? What's the number?
again, we don't necessarily keep track of all the phone calls we receive, but we have received a number over the years regarding people complaining about amateur radio antennas being too high in people's backyards and just being invasive in their property. As I said in the staff memo, the development code doesn't really have any specific standards regulating these antennas, so this is kind of a way to ameliorate some of those concerns from the phone calls we've received over the years.
When was the last time you got a phone call about it?
Matt, when did we receive that phone call last time?
It was sometime last year.
Okay. I haven't noticed any antennas popping up, I guess. I'm just trying to figure out what.
They're not common. It's a small interest, I guess, hobby group.
In fact, when we met with the some of the amateur radio folks, they said there's about 30 active amateur radio folks here in the community.
So,
If I may, I was actually really excited to see this on our work session. My brother is a bit of a nerd, and and forced me to take my amateur radio license, the initial one. And one of the things that I'm happy to see that we start getting in, because I started looking into the code and I was confused about what you could do and what you can't do. So I think just clarification is a good thing.
but right now, there's nothing preventing anybody from doing it as it is, correct?
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Mount, that is correct. If somebody wanted to put a 100-foot amateur radio tower in the backyard, they could do it.
But it's never happened.
It's going to happen now.
Any other discussion?
And this is for 30-day public comment?
That is correct.
Okay. No further discussion? All right, then we'll move on to item number 5, Mr. McLaughlin. This is the wireless
Okay.
facilities.
This ordinance adopts the establishment of a new chapter in City Code under Title IX General Regulations concerning wireless facilities in the public right-of-way. The Arizona Legislature approved House Bill 2365, which was signed into law and became effective on August 9th of last year. The bill allows wireless providers to install and operate small cells and related equipment in the city rights-of-way and public easements. Cities are required to establish and make available rates, fees, and terms that are consistent with the new legislative requirements by the end of this week. Thus, the emergency ordinance provision is included. Small wireless facilities are limited in size to 6 cubic feet for the antennas and 28 cubic feet for the wireless equipment that is required to send and receive radio signals to the site. They are typically co-located on existing utility poles. The law exempts from zoning review any new replacement or modified utility pole that does not exceed the greater of 40 feet or 10 feet above the tallest utility pole which is located within 500 feet of the proposed site, that not to exceed 50 feet. Any new monopole, which is a wireless support structure that is not more than 40 inches in diameter at the ground level and has all the wireless facilities mounted on or contained inside the pole, would be permitted through the city's normal development review process. The law allows local governments to develop reasonable objective design standards for the small wireless site, but restricts cities from imposing separation standards from residential units or other small wireless sites. The proposed amendments contained in Resolution 2017-106 provide for the definition of terms, application and registration requirements, objective design and construction standards, required camouflaging of equipment to blend in with the surrounding environment, permit, application, and right-of-way use fees by facility type, and standards of review and approval and processing time frames for wireless facilities be placed within the public rights-of-way in accordance with the new law. The technical specifications and operational maintenance requirements were prepared by the city's engineering staff, who will be chiefly responsible for administering the provisions of this chapter to ensure the city's interests are protected. No public comment was received during the 30-day comment period, and with that, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Questions or discussion on this one? Looks like you picked a good one to brief, Matt. Okay, we'll move on to item number 6. And there's a whole series of things here. Again, Mr. Pregler.
Thank you, Mayor Mueller, members of council. The proposed code amendments before you are the result of the 2017-2018 work program, which provided a summary of proposed development code amendments that are to be completed by the end of 2018 fiscal year, so I think we might make it. The focus of the amendments is to identify ways in which the staff and the city can improve efficiencies, clarify requirements, and help residents and business owners move through the development process more easily. The work program was presented before the Mayor and City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission at 2 separate work sessions in 2017. After receiving positive feedback from both reviewing bodies, staff proceeded with writing the amendments. The proposed code changes focused on the following development areas: water adequacy, manufactured home and RV standards, administrative modifications, fences and wall height, administrative site plan standards and submittal requirements, increased commercial heights in general commercial zoning districts, reduced building setbacks in the infill incentive district areas, low impact development, removal of Article 151.05 performance standards, relocation of the text to separate sections of the development code and city codes, and property maintenance enforcement. The amendments were presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission on October 17th, 2017, who recommended approval with a vote of 4-1. The Mayor and City Council recommended the amendments be approved for the 30-day public comment period on December 14th, 2017. No additional public comments have been received with the public comment period. So should the council approve the amendments tonight, they will take effect in 30 days. This concludes staff's report.
Thank you, Mr. Bregler. Questions? Yes, sir.
I know we had plenty of discussion on all this. I think the part that still bothers me is the code enforcement officer having the ability to bring criminal misdemeanor complaints against somebody who's out of compliance. Thank you. I don't have a problem so much with most of these changes. I'm willing to accept most of them as trade-offs for a few of the ones that I'm not really in favor of. But at this point, Mr. Mayor, I still think that code enforcement officer is being given quite a bit of power when there's already a legal structure in place that works. It may not be as efficient for the city government, but I think it's a little bit more fair to the public at large. And if we're going to pass more and more regulations and put more ordinances and things like that into place, then we shouldn't default by making it easier for the code enforcement person to simply pass along their judgment without having a law enforcement person there. Those are my 2 cents on that part.
I'll ask Matt here. What do you gain by having this change? As either as an administrator?
Okay. Well, first of all, misdemeanor violations are few and far between. The code under Section 150.28 provides that the city manager designee, city attorney, building official, code enforcement officer shall enforce this chapter, being Chapter 150. There's a restriction under 150.37 that's proposed for amendment that limits misdemeanor violations to be issued only by the police officer or city attorney. Misdemeanor violations are reserved under 150.31 for a public nuisance or the second or subsequent violation of any other section within 2 years of the first violation. And that's really intended for, there are cases where we've issued multiple civil citations and have not yet yielded compliance. And again, they're few and far between, but there may be, there's an avenue here to escalate enforcement to potentially impose a misdemeanor violation that would be heard by a judge. The benefit to having the code enforcement officer issue the complaint would be that they are the person that's most familiar with the circumstances of the case and would be there to testify in front of the judge to support the findings of fact that led to the misdemeanor violation being issued. A police officer doesn't necessarily have that same background to the case and would therefore have to rely heavily on the code enforcement officer to support the violation. And You know, so if this amendment's denied, we would have to again involve the city attorney or police officer in prosecuting the case, and continue to use the civil citation method as our primary means of enforcing
Back
codes.
there, in your normal process now, when you have a guy who's repeating the same violation, don't you normally consult with the attorney to make sure that, the city attorney, to make sure that you're doing it the right way?
Absolutely, each and every step of the way.
That wouldn't necessarily be a change. The only difference by not allowing your inspector to issue the citation would be, we have a uniformed officer rather than somebody who is working for you do the citation.
That's right.
You still talk to the attorney before you would issue on the rare occasion you would issue the second one, you still would do that.
We would still consult with the
Consult with
city
the attorney.
attorney.
Is that on every single situation?
Matt, can you answer that question?
For what?
Would the code enforcement officer or you consult with the city attorney on every single situation before he issues the ticket?
For civil citations
Or a criminal misdemeanor?
or criminal misdemeanor violations, we would consult with the city attorney. It's just in the prosecution of that citation that we would have to involve a Sierra Vista police officer in testifying before a judge.
And I guess what I'm hearing is that if we get to the case where we're looking so bad that we're looking at a civil citation, you're gonna already consult with the attorney.
A misdemeanor violation, you mean? Okay.
Yeah, a misdemeanor violation, you already would consult with the attorney to make sure you're on solid ground. And then it's a matter of, then we're just talking a matter, you follow all the other procedures, it's just a matter of whether you have a sworn officer do it or your guy do it.
That's
And-
basically it.
Yeah, and that's where I have trouble. I don't think we necessarily need the sworn officer as long as we've done the consultation with the attorney.
If I may, to explain the process, on a misdemeanor citation, the officer is signing the ticket that they have developed probable cause for this. So the officer and the officer only has limited immunity regarding his duties. So even if a code enforcement officer explained to a police officer, I have probable cause to issue a citation, even the city attorney, the officer would have to have an understanding of the code, look at all the evidence and determine the probable cause before they would issue the citation, as the officer would sign it. So the officer would have to be a little bit more involved in the investigation to understand the probable cause is there, because they're signing the citation saying that they have probable cause for the crime. Because when you cite somebody on a misdemeanor, you're actually placing them under arrest
Right.
and citing them and releasing them, and then on their promise to appear. Now, if the person does not or refuses to sign the citation, we would have to come anyway and book the person into jail because they're signing the citation saying we promise to appear in court. So if they refuse to sign the citation under a misdemeanor citation, they would have to be booked into jail. So we would have to get involved in that particular case no matter what, if they refuse to sign. But otherwise, the majority of the time, the officer would have to get more involved and have to understand the code to be able to issue the ticket for a misdemeanor.
Yes, ma'am.
I just think as a policy issue, I just think if you're going to do a criminal misdemeanor that the police need to be involved. I'm just not sure that the city, I just don't think we should be involved in that. And I understand that's just a policy decision, and that's how I feel about that.
Currently, we do have one case where this is already the case, where animal control officers can cite misdemeanors under the city code and also under state law. So there is precedent in the city for this happening.
But they're uniformed officers, though, right?
No, they are not. They're not certified officers. They are civilians. They are given that authority through the city council, through the city ordinance.
That's a good, important piece of information to know on that, too.
Okay, so obviously, we need to do some reflection and thinking about this. If we need to make a motion to amend citation, we can do to make an amendment to change the approval of code. We can do that on Thursday. The other thing is to make a motion to exclude that section for further discussion, and go ahead with the rest of it as well. So there's some options here.
What did the one vote against it in P and Z entail?
It's a good question.
Mayor Mueller, Councilmember Blanchard, that was related to a property maintenance issue regarding grass, the maintenance of grass in front yard. The person that had somebody was at the Planning and Zoning Commission had a violation on their property. It exceeded 12 inches, which is a violation of the property maintenance code, and their request to the P&Z was that natural grasses should be exempted from the property maintenance codes. One of the P&Z members felt that more information should be provided to them regarding this and voted against the code amendments as a result.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Mayor, at least for me, until we get maybe a little bit more discussion, I would like to see at least that part referencing the code enforcement officer temporarily shelved for further discussion and move everything else forward.
Yeah, and the way to do that is on Thursday, to make an amendment to extract whatever section that is.
Okay.
And then we can, and say it's for the purpose of further discussion on that particular section. That way we can get everything else in code, and we can have more discussion at the next council meeting.
Thank you.
And Mayor Mueller, keep in mind there's two separate ordinances related to these amendments. The first ordinance relates to the development code changes. The second amendment relates to the city code language. So the property maintenance is under the city code ordinance.
Okay. So then that's the section you're going to want to make your amendment to change. So we just need to make sure we get the right paragraph and article, so we're not doing something silly.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other discussion on item 6? All right, we'll now move on to item 7, and we'll continue with the Jeff Pregler Show.
You have the
Property-
agenda, right, Mr.
yeah,
Pregler?
I think that's what we just
Building and
covered.
property maintenance.
Yeah, that's the memo reflects both ordinances.
So you did both 6 and 7 together?
I did, yes.
Okay. Okay, anything else on those? All right. And then we do have the appointment of a couple of folks for the Library Commission. Any comments on that?
Yay.
Yay. And at the request of city management, we'll now go to item C, and we'll do item B after that. So, Mr. Patuchek, mid-year budget review.
Thank you, Mayor Mueller, members of the council. As was mentioned, last year, we set forth to develop and update our financial policy and wanted to bring that to your attention today. We have a draft ready for your discussion. We also had a request by Councilmember Mount to take a look at our mid-year financial position, and we're prepared to do that as well today. So they're going to kind of work together, but we'd like to start with the mid-year financial update and then move into the financial policy considerations. And we also plan to make the mid-year financial update part of our normal course of of responsibilities during again before the budget, the upcoming budget process.
Is there any difference between these two documents? We have,
It was also posted, but in case they didn't print it out.
Oh, it's on one page, that's why it's thicker.
And Mr. Felix will make the presentation.
Mayor, members of council, first off, we always do a mid-year financial report. Usually it's just a handout given to those who wish to read the exciting world of accounting. This is the first time we've done a formal presentation of it, and we can continue forward. The general fund is what we're focusing on because that is the largest and most important, pretty much, fund of the city, and the one where we've got the greatest, and the council's got the greatest flexibility to actually do the things they want to. Special revenue funds are restricted, and the enterprise funds are kind of set up, and we'll discuss an item with them. Overall, we're doing very well. For the major fund revenues, I just focused on the ones that are over $1 million budgeted and combined. The really good news that you've been reading in the reports that have been sent out is sales tax is above budget by just over 2%, so that is very good. That helps us next year when we face some new challenging public safety issues. One of those things of the good news to the boss is if we get enough sales tax growth, that can cover next year's PSPRS increase. Licenses and permits are also doing very well. Building permits are ahead of budget noticeably, so that's good news. I don't know if that's going to continue. I know that we've had one or two big projects that got dropped in, so that affects the revenue, but we also don't know when all the new projects may come in. State shared revenues are almost on track. The little shortfall in the charges for service. Gasoline sales are still down, so the gasoline revenue is off, but of course there'll be a corresponding savings in the O&M cost for that gasoline as well, so that kind of fits with that. As far as the expenditures go, the salary and benefits are pretty close to on budget. Yeah, there are some savings in salaries, for instance, in the police department, but then they're working overtime to make up for it. Same with the fire department. Plus, the fire department's having some overtime trying to ramp up for the Fort contract that they were doing in the first half of the year. Councilmember Calhoun?
So you're saying any extra money that is not being used to pay for new employees is being used for the overtime that, for the most part,
Correct.
that staff is having to do because you're short of employees?
Correct.
Okay.
So, O&M, again, we addressed that. The biggest issue you see here with the O&M actual versus budget is, remember, we plugged in a flat $1.9 million for the Fort contract. There were minimal expenditures related to that in the beginning of the year, and there are obviously minimal revenues associated with the first half of the year. They've ramped up. They've now taken over. They're operating on the post. We were given instructions last week on how to bill for that, so you do have to bill the Fort in arrears for the services, so those bills will be going out soon, and we'll start to be getting the revenue in for the operations of the contract on post. Yes, ma'am?
A question to that. It's obvious that this was at a cost savings to Huachuca.
Yes, ma'am.
I remember we discussed this before, but is this at a cost to the city or how is it going to balance out the cost to the community?
Well, it's going to balance out the community. It gives the fire department flexibility. We will be getting more revenue than we will be paying for the contract. We've got projects set up to track all the expenditures related to the post. The fire department staff has those project numbers and what they need to use. Ambulance billing is billing those separately and putting a code in to know what is being billed on the post. Revenue would not have gotten. And then, of course, since it's a billing through the city's billing system, we can also track the project number to it so that we can track all the revenues we're getting for this versus the expenses we're getting for it, because we want to ensure that city tax dollars are not going to support the Fort contract.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, it's important to note it was a fixed price contract, so as a result, we do have some flexibility in terms of how we operate within that fixed price. So we have the ability to mix and match, let's say, full and part-time folks, whatever gives us a cost advantage to do that. So we're set up to monitor our costs very closely to ensure that we don't end up subsidizing this contract. But so far it is working out pretty well for us.
And yes, the software system does have the flexibility and the power, and the fire department knows how to use it. So for regular town officer that's in town has to go and do something on post, they can assign their time to that project. So that will be tracked as well. And they've already been doing it as they work. Some of the current staff has been working on the recruiting and the testing and things like that. They've also been tracking that time to attribute that to the contract as well. So we're trying to get all the costs that are being involved in that. Capital, where items are on order, some items are not in yet. The biggest items that are not in yet are the 2 replacement ambulances, which total about $400,000. And then, of course, the debt service is normal.
One thing that will be a topic of discussion based on the personnel numbers that you saw, obviously, is the balance between the need for full-time public safety personnel, both in police and fire, vis-a-vis the cost of the overtime that we're incurring by having the openings that we have. So we need to do a little closer analysis of that for you, and then we'll make recommendations, if appropriate, to add full-time if we think that will effectively combat the overtime costs that we're facing. Overtime costs don't only affect us in terms of the budget for that year, but can have a detrimental effect on future public safety retirement system costs as well. So it is something that needs to be addressed.
So in addition to that, the cost, the actual of people working overtime, does that create any kind of an issue around overtired or overworked, or however you would make that sort of thing?
Well, I think the chiefs can better address, the fatigue factor and those kind of things. From my vantage point, there are effects, but I'm looking at it more, from the cost perspective. We have some generational issues that are going on. Most of the people that do volunteer for the overtime, based on the analyses that we've done so far, seem to be more veteran police officers or firefighters, and of course they have more, incentive to volunteer for that. So we're not casting any aspersions on them. It's just the way it is. And then, of course, your younger generation, doesn't seem to be as interested in the overtime opportunities, which of course would be a cost savings to us. I'll let the chiefs address the fatigue factor.
So in planned overtime, which we don't have a ton of except for special things like DUI task force and that type of stuff, it's not too big of an issue. The overtime that becomes an issue for the stress-related are call-outs, SWAT, detectives, staying after hours to handle calls for service, or calling people on overtime when somebody comes in sick and so they miss a day off. So yes, it does add to the stress levels of the officer, how busy they are, especially if they don't get their planned days off because they get called into work. So it does have an effect, the overtime. What's, as part of that is also just the daily load of what they have to do in the process also. I'll let Chief York deal with the fire department.
One more question though
Sure.
for you, Chief. So is some overtime a have to rather than a volunteer?
Most of it's volunteer, but there are times, so say like the Christmas parade, we'll have so many slots open that we have to fill. And if they don't get filled by a certain amount of time, it becomes voluntold, okay, for it. In fact, this last Christmas parade, I filled in a slot because we couldn't get it filled. So that does happen. The other types of things like the DUI task force and Stone Guard and those type of stuff fill up pretty quickly. But it's the parades where we have to have, because those are usually one officer at a time on a day specific, but parade special events can call for multiple officers, 4th of July, that kind of stuff that are harder to fill.
Thank you.
Chief, could you explain also the effect on retirement and system costs for participating in Stone Garden?
Sure. So Stone Garden, is, as you know, is the Department of Homeland Security provides money for overtime to departments to enhance their border security. And what the program basically is they have officers that they pay the overtime on and vehicle mileage and maintenance costs to be in certain areas to enforce the law, then they can put their agents in other areas to deal with individuals. So it's an enhanced border security initiative. What that does do in effect, though, is we can only pay overtime for it. All right, so it's part of the program, and so we are paying overtime. And the vast majority of the officers that sign up for this are veteran officers. So you are paying overtime, which then increases their salaries, which then increases their retirement benefit. So there is a net effect.
First for the overtime.
Yes, and get the governor's office highway safety is the same way. They pay the overtime. They're not paying a regular salary for it, so you're paying overtime to work DUI task force and those kind of things. So same type of thing with Stone Garden and the DUI task force.
Fire Chief, did you want to?
Yeah,
we've eliminated basically any voluntary overtime or special projects or special events. Most of it. I mean, Art in the Park, the big stuff where we have a presence, we will still do, but that's fairly minimal. Most everything else that we do as far as public education and those kind of things, we get the duty crews to do. I think it's kind of subjective and hard to put a finger on the stress level of doing a lot of overtime and working more. But one way that I think that we have seen a change, and today is actually an example of it, we had to have a mandatory holdover. We have minimum staffing requirements. We couldn't get anybody to do overtime today, and we needed a person. So we had to, like Adam said, voluntold, we had to mandate somebody had to work. Doing overtime, whatever they had planned. If they were going home and they had something to do, they couldn't do it. So, and that's happened more this past year, and I can't tell you the numbers. I'd have to look that up. But I've seen it happen more frequently because the battalion chiefs will generally tell me, "Hey, we had another mandatory today," and I think that is a telling number that we're having people work a lot. And they're not volunteering because they're just tired of getting the overtime. And our numbers are big.
Mr. Mount.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, and I'll try to be rhetorical because I know you're just now presenting us the data. Well, first off, thank you. You checked off one of my bucket list items for council, so this is good. So I think, though, that the questions that at least start to formulate for me, maybe for some of the other council members, is there's obviously a reoccurring theme here. And I know at least Chief Thrasher and I have talked about what does it take to get people here to Sierra Vista to put on our service uniforms and go to work and to offset some of these costs. When can council, I know we have budget coming up shortly, but when can we start to get a little bit more information of what it's going to cost to get these people in, but also more importantly, how much are we going to have to invest in recruiting or changes to recruiting procedures in order to actually, I mean, we can say that, hey, yeah, we're going to fund. If we can't increase our recruiting efforts, we're still never going to fill those positions. So I think there's two pieces here that we have to look at. And how soon will council know what the bill is for that? And then what's the trade-off out of some other service?
Well, we usually kick off the budget process by going through revenue projections and trying to compare where we see the next year coming versus the year past. And Councilmember Mount, after that, we'll really hone in on our personnel numbers that we're going to be presenting to you for the next fiscal year. We'll have a full work session on that. And what we'd like to do, and I've already been working with the fire department on some strategies. We don't have the recruiting issues in the fire department, but we do have overtime issues that we've already been working to address, and we need to have that same discussion with the police department in terms of both the items that you discussed. What can we do on the recruiting side? Do we need to spend more money? Do we need to change the process? And then an analysis of how many more positions will we need and how effective would that be with regards to the overtime costs that we've been incurring this past year. The situation has really become more and more acute over the last couple of years. So as part of the budget process, we'll have a full work session devoted to these personnel issues.
Thank you.
And Mayor, Councilmember Mount.
Probably in the April timeframe, I would say, so not too far from that.
And Mayor, Councilmember Mount, recruiting for police is very difficult. I mean, you guys did the class comp study. They're in line. We make sure they stay in line. But as the chief can tell you, because I know I've discussed overtime and vehicles and the whole budget process with him, everybody's facing a shortfall of officers in the state and nationwide. As you've seen, the incidences have gone on, being a police officer is less desirable than it has been in the past. So firefighters have always, I don't know, Ron can be happy they've had some sort of special cachet about being a firefighter that's been, people like to do it. That's what kids want to grow up to be. Police has been less lately, and it's just kind of maybe changing culture. And fire department also tends to be children of the firefighter get involved too. So there's different demographics involved.
That doesn't relieve us of the responsibility of trying to make better efforts.
No, it's good points. I think we realize where those things are at. I mean, ultimately we have to compete. So we need to figure out how to compete. That's what I'm asking. What resources do you need to compete?
Okay.
kind of in summary, as you'll see, we're slightly ahead at this point. The financing's not included if we're going to finance this year. If we can cash out, we cash out. None of the transfers have been done in between the funds to support that. So as we're sitting right now, revenues are over expenditures by about $35,000 at the midpoint of the fiscal year. Now, items of okay, sorry.
My last questions, and maybe you may have just been leading into that. So when I look at the departments, and I won't be specific, but I see some are a little lower than others. Is the trade-off from going low on some of the others to pay for some of the ones that are a little higher? That looks pretty calculated.
Dave and I look at that more on a higher fund level.
Mm-hmm.
So, we can identify specific issues in the various departments. For example, we were able to identify that overtime was becoming, a major problem in the fire department. So we started working on that a few months ago in terms of trying to find some strategies. So, yeah, some departments may be running under because of, attrition or turnover or whatever, retirements, whatever the case may be. And then some, obviously public safety might be running over because of the overtime situation.
In another situation,
we're looking at it from the fund level, not just the department level.
Okay. And also, as I mentioned in there, for instance, for my budget, I pay the $100,000 Department of Revenue bill in August. So there's most of my budget right there written off in the first quarter of the year. IT, most of their large maintenance contracts for the public safety software, for the financial software, and so many others are also written within the first quarter of the year. So they'll look over budget because that's when most of their expenditures are. Mm-hmm. Parks will look under budget because you don't want to seed and grass the fields in November. You get your grass seed, the seeds, and all this stuff they need to do theirs is usually March, April timeframe. So they are usually below budget at the midpoint because most of their expenditures will occur in the last half of the year.
They're above
so
budget,
some of that
right?
is
They're above right now.
Yeah, well, I paid the Department of Revenue bill for $100,000. Okay. Unfortunately, we kind of have to do that as much as I don't like to.
Yeah, that one hurts.
Yeah,
all right.
That's most of my budget right there. Two items, one item of concern, one item of discussion. Sharon got notified 2 weeks ago that effective January 1, the county is going to be charging for recycling 2 weeks after they started doing it. It was free. As of right now, they're going to charge us $32.50 a ton, and every quarter they're going to go back and review the costs and adjust it every quarter. Now, obviously, $32.50 is still better than $65.50, so we still want to encourage people to do it. But given the situation for recycling in the whole country, with China not buying recycling and that, even Tucson is losing money on recycling right now. It has fallen off. So we are currently waiting to get more data in, get it through next month, and then we'll be analyzing what's going on with the fund, and we may have to discuss a possible rate increase given what has happened here with what the county is doing. That will be part of the budget process. And we'll make sure to meet all the, if we have to do it, we'll give the financial information to the council and we'll meet all the proper notification deadlines that the state has put in place. Next item, as you see, we have some revenue over expenditures, is the fiscal policy, which then takes us to the next agenda item.
Any questions on what we just covered? Any further questions? Okay. Go for it, David.
Okay. We first put in a financial policy in about 2004, I think, is when we did our initial one. We'd had an investment policy and some other debt policies before, but that was the first unified policy, and we reviewed it over time. What we're recommending to the changes to the current policy, the first is in the cost recovery section, removal of the reference to the leisure fund. We don't have it anymore. It's never worked out. It cannot really be an enterprise fund because it can never cover the overhead costs. So it stopped being a revenue fund many years back. Maintenance, fee facility exclusion. Fees are to cover salary. Technically, capital maintenance is not an O&M cost, but this clarifies. It makes it very clear that that is not intended. Likewise, next paragraph, $10,000 financial really always, because in years past, as both Councilmember Blanchard and Mayor Mueller, $20,000 senior games, for example. So any item that will require a direct city subsidy of at least $10,000 will be called out specifically in the budget for the council to discuss. Under the fund cash balance section, we've added that whole paragraph in there regarding the reserve usage. If there's a reserve growth, and we'll go over that in a future slide as one of the discussion points. In the human resources section, since the council had an objective of the class compensation study, we've added a section and paragraph in there regarding maintaining a class compensation plan specifically, since that's what the council had set out before. So the first discussion point, years back the council had set out these policies. That was what they had wanted to do for community development, 100% of the direct salary costs plus 15% of overhead. Now when I say direct salary costs for community development, that would be you come in and the 4 hours that somebody spends on a plan review, the direct cost of the 4 hours of that employee plus an overhead are done. It does not mean that if I have one plan review that comes in a 3-month period, that we're going to charge enough to cover the salary costs of being in the department for those 3 months. So it's the cost related for the employee or employees involved with that event to do the work and cover it. Leisure class fees, 100% of direct expenditures. That would be instructor costs, material costs, and things like that. That was where we had problems with the leisure fund, is you could never cover the indirect costs of the supervisors, coordinators, and other things like that. Aquatics facility fees, 50% of direct salary and operating and maintenance costs, excluding utilities and capital maintenance. Reason for excluding utilities is there are times when the pool has to be drained and refilled, and the control of the building, temperature and water and things like that are under the Public Works Department, so it's not fair to make the leisure director responsible for something that they've got no control over. Fuel charges, 100% of our cost to do it, plus a per gallon flowage fee to cover the equipment involved in it. And same with fleets, parts, and labor charges, 100% of the employee cost to do it, direct cost to do it, plus an overhead charge for indirect costs such as the software, any other contracts we've got outstanding, disposal fees that are not easily charged out, shop supplies that are kind of a general bucket type thing. So that's what is done before. Not recommending any changes, nor is the city manager. However, it is a point for council to set their goal. And is there any?
Well, I just want to clarify, fuel charges includes airfield as well as the motor pool, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Keep charging.
Okay. Second discussion point. In the end of the year, we have increases to fund balances. We've been slowly growing the general fund reserve. What we've added in here is the possibility for us, before we close the books and issue the financial report, to come to council and say we are looking at a $70,000 growth to the general fund reserves. Do you, and then here are the options with this, the staff would make a recommendation to increase the fund balance, take the money to pay down existing retirement liabilities, pay cash for a cash out of capital project instead of financing it, set aside for paying down debt. We've done that in the past where we put in money aside to pay off our MPC bonds early, or cover an emergency expenditure that may have come up during this time frame.
So, Mr. Mayor, I think that gets to the point that we talked about last year during the budget process, and I think at least the recommendation that's been put out achieves that goal, which would be let staff show up with the best recommendations possible to include putting it back into the reserves, but at least give council the policy decision to turn around and say, we want to go ahead and we appreciate your recommendation, but we also want to take care of this capital project or PSPRS or something along those lines based on your recommendations as staff. But I think that gives us a little bit more flexibility and maybe a little bit more of a discussion point of where that cash goes. So I think as presented is good.
Okay.
And I think too, Mr. Mayor, it's important to add it to the policy. We always try to operate within, set, council, goals and objectives and policies. So when this year-end thing comes up, David and I have always had this discussion of, well, where should this money go if we do indeed have any, and generally it's been accepted practice usually to add it to reserves, which is usually the decision we make, or cash out some already budgeted capital item that was potentially projected for financing. And if we see an advantage to cash it out, it's in the budget, we might make a decision like that. But, since it was never clearly spelled out exactly how that process works, I thought it was important to bring that to you guys, with this set of potential guidelines for decision-making, so that that decision would rest with the council instead of with me.
Yeah, and one last thing, and Chuck, I hope in all this, at least for my part, there was never any criticism levied at, especially you or management, on that process. I think, though, that when we go through these budget processes, at least the 3 that I've been through, this will be the 4th one coming up, you guys have no control when state shared revenues get yanked back or PSPRS goes crazy. And I think that instead of all that kind of falling on your shoulders, it's a policy decision of us, and we'll take your best recommendation, but it gives us all some flexibility.
I think the other thing too, and knock on wood, nothing has happened so far this year, but if we have a potential emergency, expenditure, some, let's say an HVAC system, breaks down that wasn't budgeted for, we're going to come to you guys. It may be an emergency, and we're going to let you know, hey, we needed to find some money to fix this item, but. We have to have a little bit of flexibility to work in an emergency situation, but this covers, I think, all the other, situations that may come up.
That's it, David?
What?
Any other questions? Any other questions or discussion?
I want another slide.
The other thing I want, in context, David and Linda did a nice job reviewing. They looked at a lot of different policies around the state and showed them to me. I was pleasantly surprised to think that ours was the best done in the most succinct manner. We had ones that we looked at that were like one paragraph or one page, and others that were like whole books. So I think ours covers all the points, in as brief a way as possible.
Bob, you had a question?
Where does our emergency fund stand now?
We're at about $4 million in the general fund reserve. The bond rating agencies generally for sales tax-based cities like a 2-month reserve, which for us would be closer to $6 million in our general fund reserve. But we're certainly, I think, the highest we've ever been as of right now. And we've been able to continue at least add a little bit every year to the general fund reserves.
It's been a long haul to, one, rebuild it, and 2, do that during the last 8 years, which have been very difficult for us. So, that's a credit to everybody, from council through staff, that we've been able to do that, during this last, 8-10 years or so. So hopefully things turn around and be a lot easier.
I think we're in better shape than any other city in the state.
Well.
Okay. Anything else?
In a lot of ways.
Thanks, David. We'll go ahead and move on to the presentation by the Environmental Affairs Commission. Gwen, do you want to do any introductions?
Sure. I'll just open with that everybody received a copy of this recommendation that's coming from the full EAC Commission related to some water issues. You've heard some of this before. We're going to get a summary, I believe, from Mr. Finstmacher. And there are other members of EAC here that are here in support also of this recommendation. So please come forward. Everybody, this is Jean Finstmacher, an associate member of the Environmental Affairs Commission, and there are other members of Environmental Affairs here in the front row. We have questions.
Thank you,
Jean.
Mr. Mayor, council members, for giving us this opportunity. I hope you've had a chance to read the EAC recommendation for restoring the sustainable yield of the Sierra Vista subwatershed aquifer. Let me summarize the issue. First, as you may be aware, over the years, the Upper San Pedro Partnership has looked at ways to protect the river from the ever-increasing depletion of the aquifer. This included importation of CAP water and pumping in water from the Gulf of California and northwestern Mexico. But because of the high cost, it did not happen, and there is still no plan. Then the 2004 National Defense Authorization Act mandated restoration of the sustainable yield by and after 30 September 2011, but that wasn't achieved, and there's still no plan. With the sustainable yield with the sustainable yield deficit at 6,000 acre-feet, as reported by USGS in 2012, and with the Sierra Vista area water use being the major contributor to this deficit, that deficit has accumulated to around 120,000 acre-feet between 2002 and 2017. Something needs to be done soon to stop and begin reversing this increasing accumulation, but there's still no plan to do so. It should be noted, however, that the 6,000 acre-feet doesn't need to be accomplished in 1 year. Regardless of how many years it may take to reach that 6,000 acre-feet annual recharge, the recharges that are achieved each year repeat themselves each year after each year contributing to eventually eliminating the deficit and eliminating the accumulating deficit. So we at the EAC developed a plan for eliminating the annual deficits as needed to restore the sustainable yield of the Sierra Vista subwatershed. It was developed as a relatively detailed proposed USP plan that could be published as is to get this effort started in a timely manner with some relatively unique but simply designed detention basins at priority locations in or near the Sprinka. The details of that proposed plan facilitate eliminating the annual deficits as needed to restore the sustainable yield, and it does so relatively inexpensively using a rather simple Woodcutters Canyon detention basin widening concept and the Palominas project as the engineering model as explained in the plan. The details of each project include, for example, the estimated acre-feet of annual recharge that is expected to be from each of these based on a Stantec estimate for similar facilities. The estimated cubic feet per second of 100-year storm event inflow is as needed to size the outflow pipes. The estimated average maximum cubic feet per second per inflow per storm event as needed to size the smaller potentially adjustable detention basin pipes to enable optimizing drain time to accommodate various size storm events and to do so potentially real time. It includes a suggestion for an on-site visit for estimating the length and height of the dams as needed to safely provide a 6 foot level detention basin to where water flows into the basin at the level of the height higher than the top of the dam. It includes expected costs and potential funding sources. And while such details as estimated start and completion dates and responsible agencies are not currently available, they can be added and revised or updated as the data becomes available as best estimates and or monitoring data evolves. Once approved, a USPP plan can include almost immediately implementation by volunteer agencies concerned with the future of the fort and or designated partnership members such as BLM and conservation agencies such as the TNC to completely eliminate the annual deficit as needed to restore the sustainable yield of the aquifer. We would greatly appreciate the city's effort toward getting this plan published as a USPP plan as soon as possible. This is needed to protect the river and to help protect the fort and the local economy in any BRAC or sequestration action whenever they may occur after the approval of the plan. I'd be glad to address any questions you might have.
Does anybody have any specific questions on what's being proposed? I've got a couple of comments I'd like to make.
I have one question. I want to be clear that your request, the request of the EAC, is if the council would approve of this plan to go to the USPP as their plan of how we will mitigate the deficit in.
No, and not really asking the council to approve the plan. We're asking the council, as members of the Upper San Pedro Partnership, to take the action to get the Upper San Pedro Partnership to publish this plan and to manage it. We just need to get a plan published because we've gone so many years doing a little bit here, a little bit there, thinking this, thinking that, but there is no real plan. There are 4 projects out there right now by the Nature Conservancy, Riverstone, Palominas, the one down by
Bella Vista and
yeah. Those 4 projects are in process, and we are showing those as the first 4 plans in this documented plan. Mm-hmm. Those four projects, for instance, will mitigate about 1/6 of that deficit once they're completed. One of them is completed right now, but it has not been picked up by the USGS in their annual reporting. That's why we still see 6,000 acre feet. So incrementally, as these projects get completed and get implemented in the upper USGS reports, we will see this deficit start going down. We've added 8 new projects in here, is the key to this thing, based on Stantec estimates, based on other data that we have garnished out of the documentation for each one of these projects. So again, we're asking that the council, as members of the Upper San Pedro Partnership, do what they can to get the partnership to publish this as a plan.
Okay.
I do have one other question.
Okay.
My question is, the second paragraph in your introduction talks about a mandated restoration of sustainable yield, and all of this was supposed to have happened by September 2011.
Yes.
It did not happen. Now, USPP is not here to, of course, you're here to represent as a representative.
I can address that.
So that's my question. Why
did it not happen?
Yeah.
That's really the question.
Yes.
And the reason it didn't happen is because funding. And this is one of the things I wanted to talk about in my little spiel. First, Gene, I want to thank you for coming up and bringing this up to our attention again. And commissioners, we appreciate you bringing this package. And I'm going to start with a story. Hopefully I won't get too long-winded, but story over 2 years ago, we went to see our congressman and our congresswoman and our 2 senators and others as well. We brought forth a package from the Upper San Pedro Partnership with it didn't have all these projects in it, but it had a number of these projects in it. And we obviously talked to Senator McCain. His staff took notes, took the documents, et cetera, and we're going to give us feedback. Same thing with Congresswoman McSally. And when we finished with Mr. Flake, Chuck and I were kind of astounded when he said his comment to us about this issue was, well, good luck with that, and he excused himself because he had to go to another meeting. And I think what he knew is something that we've learned from the other 2 offices over the last 2 years, and that is the focus for BLM and the Department of Interior has not been on solving the problem. Their focus for the last 2 years has, in fact, been focused on establishing their water rights. And that's where all their energies are. The other issue that I suspect is that they are not set up like the Department of the Army or the Defense Department, where they've been given a goal by Congress, as was stated earlier, and then they have to develop a program for it, under the previous administration for 8 years, I don't think there was much interest in doing that. I was prepared this past year, to go up and do the whole rigmarole again, hopefully with new leadership in the Department of Interior. And by the time we were scheduled to go, Mr. Zinke had not been appointed, and we still don't have a BLM director appointed. My understanding is those folks are more interested in taking action, and that is not obviously not what has happened since 2004 on a number of these issues. So what I will pledge to you right now, guys, is I will take these when we have the earliest opportunity to meet with Interior Department, BLM people in Washington that are part of the new administration. We will go and explain what's going on, what our view of the lack of action on the part of Department of Interior, the lack of action on the part of BLM, and we will try to force again them to do what they were told by Congress to do by the authorization. That's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a challenge because we have embedded folks who aren't used to working. I'm talking federal bureaucrats who aren't used to working for a goal like this. Plus, before you can go to Congress and say I need money, they need to be able to through their plan that is over 30 years in the making and still isn't there. On 15 May, the BLM will have their conservation plan, which should state what the requirements are and the needs are for the SPRNCA, and that needs to be done before Congress. They go back to Congress and say to meet these requirements, we have to do these type of projects. So we're talking about a department that needs to be refocused. And that is a big mountain to climb. So I would ask for your indulgence. But I'm willing to go up and talk to the Interior Department and BLM National. I think with the new local BLM director that's here now, we may have somebody that we can work with. But his predecessor was not getting anything done, as you so eloquently stated, Gene. So again, I appreciate you bringing the package for us. I'm not sure the best way to do it is through the Upper San Pedro Partnership, although we can charge that hill again. The city has in fact become part of the Cochise Conservation and Recharge Network that works with the county, the city, Bisbee, Nature Conservancy, and who am I forgetting? NRCD. And the NRCD. On the other 3 or 4 projects, as you mentioned, that seems to have some success, and I really want to dual track this, both at Interior Department and then through the normal process to try to get funding, as well as work with Nature Conservancy and others who are attracting private funding at least for the other 4 projects. So that's the path forward I see. And again, I appreciate you guys looking at this again and keeping it on our radar screen, and it's going to be a challenge is what I'm here to tell you. And it's going to be a lot of work, and we're probably not going to get it done tomorrow for sure. Yeah, well, but we still need to proceed.
Yeah, let me just comment a little bit on what you're talking about here. We went through the 2011 requirement to restore the sustainable yield, and that didn't happen. And nothing happened. Nothing appeared to happen at the Ford or at the national level.
There's no consequences to
our concern. Our concern is that deficit is out there, and when it comes time for the next BRAC or the next sequestration, whenever that happens, you're going to find some agencies out there on the doorsteps of those people, reminding them that this deficit has not been eliminated and that it has an impact on the river and on the fort and the local economy.
Yeah, and gee, we're fully aware of that. Good. And we appreciate you reminding us of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything we can do?
Anything else? And this obviously needs to be a future discussion item for the council when we do our planning this year as well, in case we have opportunity. So.
my comment would be, first of all, thank you. And I saw a hand go up. Do we, can we entertain?
Normally we don't. And I don't.
Well, let me make it quick.
Okay.
I would just like to ask, as part of your...
You need to get on the mic so it's recorded.
Don't go away. Don't go away. Gene has a plan, and we've custom discussed it and massaged it. Is this something that, in their spare time, of course, the staff could take a look at and see if they find some things that they might want to, improvements that they might want to make, or?
Well, we can certainly do that too.
One
of the challenges, as I see this, not all the projects are within city limits. So we probably do staff work as long as we're not expending city funds on some of it to prep it. And again, I haven't looked at each of the proposals in detail, but I want to bet there's some things that the staff needs to look at before I take it up to the Congresswoman or the Department of Interior. So we'll do that.
Okay. So we're not going to take this to USPP.
We can try.
Okay, that was the
and
request.
that was the request, and we can bring this up. I'm sure most of the technical committee has seen most of these projects already, Gene. See, that's the other issue, is this is not the first time through. There's a political element that deals with the Upper San Pedro Partnership because we have competing agendas. Would that be that would be a political way to put that, Gene?
Amen.
Okay, so
Okay.
it's difficult.
I know there are a lot of pieces of this that we may not have a full handle on, but and
that's one of the reasons why we've had a little more success with working with the other group.
Okay. So then my request at this point would just be that we're kept to some degree up to date on what is happening in the background that maybe you're finessing with.
And that's one of the things. I do a travel report when we go to D.C. We haven't set times or locations for a D.C. trip this year, and part of the reason we're waiting is to find out if, in fact, we're going to have a BLM director that's been appointed, rather than working with the same crowd. So that's a challenge. So,
okay,
Gene, I appreciate your work. I know you feel like you're climbing a mountain and it just keeps rolling down on top of you, but you're not alone in that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'd just like to say thank you, too, and
Thank
we
you, Gene.
appreciate that you sat through the rest of the presentations today. That hopefully that was helpful to hear those reports. Thanks, Gene.
Okay, report on recent trips, meetings, future meetings. Anyone?
Future meetings?
Yeah, well, yeah. Report on trips, meetings, or any future meetings that you'll be having. I guess you're taking over was it Arts and Humanities? Or Alicia?
With your permission.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, I can do that.
And I want to thank you for doing that. Anything else on trips, meetings?
I can't think of it.
Board and commission liaison updates? I think we just had one. But
Mine are all either still recovering from the holidays, but I'm down. Anybody who's listening, I need people for the Cultural Diversity Commission. We're black on ammo.
Yeah, Chuck and I welcome the German students here from that were here as part of the exchange on Monday. So they're in town for a couple of weeks and seeing things. Future discussion items and council requests. Ms. Assistant City Manager, do you have anything that's coming up?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So on your February 20th work session, you have the airport study. Our consultant will be in to present that to council. You'll be discussing chickens, and you'll have your first social service presentation.
When is that one?
February 20th.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, on that note, with respect, I will not be at that work session. I'll be down at Tampa, at MacDill, and some of the other bases down there.
He's going on vacation.
I wish. I wish. No,
Tampa, MacDill.
Won't be a vacation. But I'll be down there, so I'll miss that part. But I will watch the video, and obviously with that particular issue, the most talked about issue for the last year.
Yep.
I think that we're all kind of pretty clear about where those are going, and I know we have some other meetings that'll continue to go on with it. So with the chickens and whatnot.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anything else from the group? Staff, we clear? Thank you for contending tonight. Meeting's adjourned.
I'm gonna see if I can run to the library.